Welcome to Let's Talk to Animals. My name is Shannon. I'm an animal sensitive and intuitive animal communicator and a Reiki practitioner with animallovelanguages.com. This feisty little fellow on my shoulder is up way past his bedtime. We're recording this in the evening, and he is Pearl Cuts. Those of you who've been with us for a while know he never misses an episode, and usually at top volume, but right now he is just angling to get down to my lap so he can roost. I love you. And here on Let's Talk to Animals, we talk about all things animal communication. That's right, interspecies communication. My big goal, if you will, is to de-woo it, to demystify it, to talk about what it is, what it isn't, how it works. I have the great good fortune to have a steady stream of amazing, cutting edge, innovative, highly empathic and intuitive animal intuitives and healers and light workers. And tonight, someone who has a very special focus and also incorporates voice dialogue and astrology into her work with people and pets. Diane Samsel, so excited to have you on Let's Talk to Animals.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You are so welcome. You came to me through a trusted colleague who thinks very highly of your work. And when I saw what you were all about, I was like, oh, yes, absolutely. We have to have Diane on Let's Talk to Animals. So Diane Samsel, you can find her. Sometimes I forget to do this at the beginning because after all of these many years of me podcasting here, there, and everywhere, I'm still like a super nervous podcast host. So I forget. Diane Samsel's website is Diane, DIA1NE, Samsel, SAMSEL.com. You can find us at animallovelanguages.com if you want to listen to the podcast, some of our other episodes, or of course share it with a friend. We always love that. But right now we're going to do what we always do, which is invite Diane to take us back to the beginning. You know, kind of how did your journey? You've got some interesting stuff on your website. There's a sweet picture of you with, I don't know if this was your first cat, but just take us back to the beginning and share how your journey kind of unfolded.
Well, as an animal communicator, 25 years ago, a friend of mine called me out of the blue and invited me to a 4-hour workshop in our town. And I went. And it was so easy. I mean, the first animal I talked to was a mare. And the first thing I talked with her was gastric distress. And that was the problem she was having. So my first communication was empathic. And then I learned about the other one, what other ways to communicate in that workshop. The next day I went out and I started practicing. I thought it was so much fun. And within, I think, 2 weeks, I had my first client, which I write about in my book. And it's just been growing since. I've been enjoying it ever since.
How amazing.
I had used Beatrice Leidecker in Cincinnati. She had come to Cincinnati, and I took my cats to visit her. And I was so impressed with that work that I just decided that's what I wanted to do.
What a neat, well, I mean, a career choice, a life path choice, a wonderful intersection of your love for animals and a way to give back and to help.
Exactly. I had been working professionally as a businesswoman. I just finished a very big consulting assignment, and I decided going forward, I was only going to do what I love to do. So I took up astrology at that time, but then this little episode with going to this workshop appeared in my life, and so I took them both up at the same time. And I started using astrology with animal communication, and it's grown since. My technique has grown, and I write about it now, and I teach it.
It's really phenomenal. You mentioned on your website that you've also used it to help find lost animals. And
I do, yeah. I do a lot.
Very intriguing to me.
Well, if you look at the astrology of the time the call comes in, I cast a chart on my computer, and that can tell me a lot about where the animal may be. I also use my animal communication skills. And so that means that not only am I looking at the likely place where the animal may be according to the chart, but I'm also getting information from the animal. And they have to work together. I just can't look at a chart and say, this is where he may be or she may be. So that's worked very well. And I have written about that technique in my book too. So anyone can learn to do this if they're a good, sensitive and a communicator, and they know a little bit about astrology. It's fairly easy to pick up.
Well, it's really interesting because I know that many of our listeners and our viewers on YouTube are either aspiring fellow animal intuitives and communicators, or they're working in the healing arts in some way and, kind of trying to maybe chart a new course in a new direction. I feel like COVID especially has kind of, reframed so much about not only how we do the work that we do, but where we do it, and what really makes our hearts sing, which is what I love about what you just said, that you only wanted to do the work that you love. For those of you who are listening to this podcast or this blogcast, and you're thinking, oh, it's too late for me, or, well, I just, I'm locked in. And it's like, you know what, guys, I didn't even start doing this work until like a year ago. And here I am, we're on episode, I think 19 or 20 of Let's Talk to Animals. Up and running, I'm teaching, I'm 51. Many of the guests that we have here on Let's Talk to Animals have, decades under their belt, but that's not a barrier to entry. In fact, if you go down to the local animal shelter and you take a look, you realize how much of a need there is. There's so much opportunity. If in a perfect world, we would all be talking with animals because it's part of our birthright operating system. It's just most of us have never looked inside and found the program that says interspecies communication and been I wonder what that is.
Well, actually, we were born with it and we were educated out of it, unfortunately.
That's such a good way to put it.
When we became language dominant, and we were told that this is the way you communicate, your invisible friend is really not there. They tell us that. And so we noticed that language dominant communication works, but we have to very often sacrifice our intuitive. I never did. My mind works differently than the average mind, so I never did. But I write about it in my book.
The Magical Language of the Heart. For those of you who are listening and are not watching us on YouTube, Diane has a book called The Magical Language of the Heart. It's full of information about her story and how she does what she does. Now, you mentioned on your website that you also had a really supportive dad who encouraged you.
Well, he said I could do or be anything I wanted to be.
How incredible. You know what? If you're listening or watching today and nobody's ever said that to you, let us be the first. You can do or be anything you want. Just sit with that. Let it sink in and imagine how it might change your trajectory.
Right. And like you said, you started at 50. I also started at 50. I'm 77 now, and I'm going strong. I don't ever intend to retire. And because it's a joy to get on the phone every day and to visit with my clients. It's an absolute joy. So it's a skill and a lifestyle that will keep your heart open. You can't do this with closed heart, as you know. So it's a delightful, joyous path. And I think anybody who wants to do it should do it. If there's a doubt, my teacher, Noel Till, who taught me astrology for 25 years, he always said, trust your instrument. Your whole body is your instrument in this.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And the whole world is information. Everything in the world breaks down to information. It may look like a tree or a computer or a dog, but it's all information in your body. Every little cell in your body is a receiver for that information. And the trick is to trust what's coming in. If your mind perceives it is probably accurate. What happens with a lot of my students is when they get information, they think, well, they start to doubt themselves. Exactly. They change their mind.
The mind gets a hold of it and starts kind of like, grunging around with it. Like, ooh, what's this? Play with it. And it's like, before you know it, the data gets lost. It gets scrambled or corrupted, as you might say. Diane, that's a good way to put it.
And every one of us has an inner critic who says, you're not doing it right. One of my best students ever, she's brilliant, was so convinced she would never do it, that she would do an entire 3-day seminar crying because she couldn't do it. Everyone else was just, loving it. And in the last 15 minutes, she got it. Mm-hmm. And it was just amazing to see her soar for that. The first time you get it, that's just going to take away that conversation that you can't do it. And then from then on, it's just trusting yourself.
Now, I'm curious, because your first formal experience of talking with an animal was the mare, it sounds like. But yes, I suspect, like so many of our viewers and listeners, that perhaps you had earlier experiences that maybe your mind told you to discount, or maybe you were just busy. It's a really interesting activity to do with yourself, is to ask yourself, have I ever felt like an animal was talking to me, whether it was a wild bird outside or a squirrel, or maybe your own pet or the neighbor's pet? For you, can you go back in time and consider when maybe was your first inkling that this was something?
It's my introduction to my book. I write about it, and I think I was 7 or 8. And my grandparents owned a farm, and they had every year they would have a veal calf. And it was my job to feed the veal calf when I stayed with them. And I remember I was staying with them for 2 weeks while my parents were out of town. When the veal calf was weaned and brought outside, I was to care for him, and I named him Leroy. And Leroy and I became best friends. I would headbutt with him. I would groom him. I knew that Leroy and I communicated. I mean, he was just as though he was another child. And then one day Leroy wasn't there, and I knew something terrible had happened to him. And but no one talked about it. No one explained it to me. But I shut down. And at that point, I would not, I would love animals, and I know I was getting communication from them, but there was a wall. But I could talk with trees. So I talked to trees after that. And trees, I grew up in Newport Beach, California, and it started with the redwoods. And the redwoods were grieving because they were decimating the forest to make, picnic tables and fences. And I was very sad about that. So I just grew up knowing I could talk with trees. It was the same as animal communication. And trees became really good at telling me where to get real estate deals.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
So it wasn't a stretch to go to animal communication when I went to that workshop, and I had my eyes open, and I never looked back. But then I remembered, why haven't I been doing this all my life? And I remembered Leroy. I had to get over Leroy. I had to grieve Leroy. Let's put it that way.
So let's talk about that, because, it's a natural blend to find a highly intuitive, empathic person being drawn to this work. You've had a couple of decades of experience under your belt, and you've got an incredible toolkit and a loyal client following. But let's say somebody's new and they're like, I just am afraid that my heart's going to hurt too much, and I don't know how to cope with that. What would you recommend? I know you teach, but just like off the cuff, not to put you on the spot, but what would you recommend for someone that's nervous that they're like, I'm not going to be able to handle it?
That's a good question. I went through a lot of therapy.
Okay. Okay.
I knew, I just knew I needed to have guidance.
Yeah.
And I found some really good, and I think everyone needs a mentor that can, where you can share what's in your heart and get some good feedback.
Yeah.
And there are many different ways to get that mentoring. I had many, many mentors. I had psychotherapists. I had my astrology teacher, mentor, Noel Till, with whom I studied for years. I went to workshops. I went to shamanic workshops. I found out as much, and I read a lot. I just found out as much as I could about life and myself. But I think it's important to read like some really good basic psychology books. So because animals and psychology of human and animals are almost identical. If you follow the work of Frans de Waal, who's an anthropologist, he's
Isn't he the one that wrote The Secret Language of Trees?
No, I don't think
no,
so.
that's Wallenbeck. Peter Wallenbeck. I love that
his
book.
Latest book was Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are?
Yeah, okay. Yep. Yeah. I read that one too. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's written he's also got a Facebook site that he shares a lot of current information with.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and animals have the same needs we have. And the more I opened up to myself and my need, my humanity, the more I opened my heart, then the more my heart was accessible to the hearts of others, whether it's my human clients or my animal clients. And what I soon began to realize, not only in my life, but everyone I was working with, their animals were a projection of who they were. Their animals had a bond with them that carried a lot of that psychological, juice. So, and then I always have an astrology chart from my consultations. And so I can tell a lot from my clients and from their animals, their lives in general. And it leads to a very rich conversation because, I just love it. And I love dialoguing with people, just getting in there and finding things out, and with the animals too.
Well, you mentioned several things. One is, of course, heal thyself first, and you've done the self-work, you've done the work, you've been interested enough to, I almost look at it as kind of like we're experimenting on ourselves for lack of a better, we're experiencing everything that we might ultimately one day be inviting others to experience as well. The secondary piece of what came out really strongly for me listening to you is the community, the mentoring. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't just have to, for those of you who are unfamiliar with, the world of learning animal communication today, rest assured you have lots of teachers to choose from. Many of them are featured on this podcast series. And that's one of the reasons for it, because it can feel overwhelming. But aside from the teacher that you choose, or teachers, because like you, Diane, I've studied with several teachers now, because it gets kind of addicting. You get really curious and you want to learn more. And that's really cool that your hobby and your work kind of blend, and it's all fun and it's all interesting, and you're making lots of new neural connections. But the thing that I've treasured the most is actually the community with my fellow communicators and my fellow students. And, for those of you who are listening or watching and you're thinking, I don't fit in anywhere. I don't, people are always talking about their people, their tribe. I don't think I have a tribe. Or maybe you're thinking, well, I love animals. I don't really like people very much. Maybe you just haven't met the right ones yet, because I'll tell you, the closer I got to this path, studying with teachers like Sonia Choquette and so many, Don Miguel Ruiz and Martha Beck, and just closer and closer to this path of animal communication, the more I started to really like the company, the human company I was keeping. So really consider that, maybe you want to study with Diane, maybe you're really resonant, maybe you're interested in both astrology and animal communication, and we haven't even touched on voice dialogue. So, but it's not just about that mentoring you get from that one instructor, it's about building a community of folks who are interested in the same things that you're interested in, that feel a similar calling. You can compare notes, you can cross refer, you can do all kinds of fun, you can collaborate. And you might just discover a whole new world, not to sound too terribly cheesy, but can you tell us a little bit more about your classes and how people can work with you?
Well, I had my last class ended a week before the COVID lockdown.
Gotcha.
And I just haven't given any classes. I can't trust the next outbreak. And so I published my book a couple of months before COVID.
Gotcha.
And so the book is now my, ambassador to the world. It's available on Amazon in both paperback and Kindle. Yeah.
Yeah, the ebook. Yeah.
Yeah, the ebook. And so so I haven't had workshops. I do have a few people I mentor, but I'm just happy having my clients because I'm quite busy with doing all three, astrology, animal communication, and voice dialogue. So to learn all three, there are more and more astrologers who are now doing animal communication. I was the first to write about it 10 years ago, and I published it in Penelope Smith's magazine, Animal Talk, I think it was called. And so just in the last couple of years, I've been watching people, women mostly, identify themselves as animal communicator and astrologer. And I'm quite proud to have, at least in my knowledge, been the first. So maybe going forward, we can have them all take up voice dialogue next.
You never know. I mean, being a light bearer, sometimes we're as surprised as anyone when something that we put out there in the world just really starts to plant seeds, and that's pretty amazing. And you mentioned mentoring. I'm a huge fan of mentoring. I in a former life, I used that word for the last 10 years or so. About 5 years ago, I ran an online mentoring group called Mentor Connect, and that was a charity for that basically matched people recovered from eating disorders with people who were recovering from eating disorders. And we were all over the world. We were in 42 countries. And so I'm huge. I've always been, mentors saved my life. Mentors have held my hand along every step of the way. I have interviewed several animal communicators here on the podcast that offer private mentoring. It's one of the best ways to learn. Just keep in mind as you're listening or you're watching that, we all can do this. But you have a component of how fast you get up and running, if speed is of the essence, or you're just really eager to learn, is knowing your learning style. Some people do really well in person workshops and group workshops. Some people do really well in self-paced classes, either in person or online. Some people work really well one-on-one. And, when you ask yourself what feels right to me, you don't have to, certification. I don't know if that really matters. I've never had a single client ask me, well, are you certified as an animal communicator? It's like, they're just kind of, they think it's cool and they trust you because other people say you're good and that you've helped them. And that's really where, it's about building that relationship. So ask yourself what feels right. Taking private mentoring sessions. I hired animal communicators for years before I realized that this was something I could do. And it came out of a meditation. It's not like I got a letter in the mail going, hey, you too can be an animal communicator, or, had somebody not going door to door selling classes. It's like, I learned it because my heart shared it with me. So, it doesn't matter what path you pick, and you don't have to get hung up in thinking, well, is this the right one? Ultimately, your heart, your spirit, and your life experiences and the animals that you meet along the way will teach you everything you need to know.
Exactly. And the teacher will appear when you're ready.
Yep.
When I was working in an office, I was producing videos, writing scripts, I have my degree in fine arts, and it was the dream job because it was very creative. And my boss he is a fantastic photographer and very creative himself. And he was good friends with Chief Two Trees, who was a shaman, Cherokee medicine man, tribal council chief who lived in my little town or nearby in North Carolina. And one day, Chief Two Trees, I'd heard a lot about him, and he scared me. Like, I was this yuppie, getting stuff done. And he walks in, and it's talking about when you're ready, the teacher will show up. He walked into my office uninvited, and he sits down in front of me, and he just starts staring at me. And if you've ever been stared at by a shaman, and a famous one at that, something happens, something very magical happens. And so I found myself just sharing with him all this stuff. And then he gave me my first teaching out of the blue. I was sitting at my desk. And then over the years, not very often, he would pop into my life and give me an incredible teaching and then pop out again. And he saved my life. Wow. At one point. We were having a very bad heat wave. I didn't have air conditioning either in my office or my apartment. We're up in the Blue Ridge, and that was before climate change. This was when climate change was starting, and I was drinking water, and I flushed all the salt out of my system, didn't know it. And one night he came to me in a dream, and he said, "You'll be dead in 3 days." He was dressed in all of his Indian regalia. He did have a formal headdress outfit. He shows me this pool of boiling orange water in the middle of a black, tarmac type place. He points to it in this big outfit, this really scary outfit. "You will be dead in 3 days." So I walk into my office the next morning, and everyone knows Chief Two Trees. And I said, "Chief Two Trees came to me in a dream and said I was going to be dead in 3 days." And they said, "You don't look well. You better go to the doctor." So I did. And it was just simple heat stroke. And I just went home, bought an air conditioner, and drank some salt and ginger ale, and I was fine. So that was my first truly magical experience, in my adult life. And I thought that changed my life completely. So when you're ready, you can be sitting on a subway car, and the guy will sit next to you and say something to you, which will put you on that path.
Incredible.
Have you had an experience like that?
I mean, I've had many experiences over the years where my intuition has kicked in at just the right moment. I also had interesting dream. I'm a dreamer. Maybe you and I.
Oh, me too.
I'm definitely a dreamer, and to the point where I often joke that my life gets much more interesting when my eyes are closed. Yeah. And so I've had, I'm only now starting to really learn how to unpack and work with my dreams, because often they do have a very I'm a highly sensitive person. When I found Dr. Elaine Aronson's work, it was like, oh shoot, finally there's a name for what I am, And so I've done a lot of work trying to create a calmer nighttime experience. But I notice, and some of the ones are so random, and I think it's just because they're getting my attention that way, like weird little premonitions and things that I'm like, really? It's like you wanted to warn me about that, but you didn't see fit to warn me about or to give me a heads up about this other major thing. But I'll tell you, the most impactful experience I've probably had was my father passed about 8 months ago, and I had just, my best friend had passed suddenly, not from COVID, just a few months prior to that. And then my relationship ended. And it was during that period of just utter heartbreak that I've meditated since I was 19, so it's over 30 years. I was meditating one morning and I just heard the words, "You are an animal sensitive and intuitive." It just came up, as sometimes these things have done over the years with me. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I was 10 years as a freelance writer, former nonprofit founder and director, author, a former songwriter and musician, corporate person, temp worker. I mean, you name it. I've run around in orange jumpsuits at the mall handing out, it's like anything and everything to kind of get my dreams up and running. And nothing had really gelled. And here I am in the middle of all of this heartache. And luckily, I had already been studying for a couple of years with Sonia Choquette, who is, I just can't say enough good things. And I had a session scheduled with her for my 50th birthday. I decided that would be a good present. My parents said, "What do you want?" And I was like, "I really want a session with my teacher." And so I asked her that question because she works with astrology. She works with Akashic records and all kinds of other disciplines to offer life coaching to her clients. And so I had just mentioned to her, that was one of my questions, what does that mean? And the first thing she said to me is, "That's a brilliant career path for you." And it was in that moment when I realized, oh my goodness, I really want to do this. Like, I hired animal communicators for years.
Wow.
I never thought that was where the cool kids hung out. Like, I never thought, I just didn't question it. I was too busy doing other things. And so, it's interesting though. I really was experiencing so much loss. And I feel like COVID has really brought that out for so many of us, that I really was kind of questioning, I no longer love what I'm doing. I certainly am not loving the life I'm living right now. I don't even know what question to ask, but can you show me something? Can you give me some direction, some guidance? My heart was very open, even though I didn't know that. And so I guess that's kind of the point I want to get across to anyone who's listening or watching and can resonate with what we're talking about. It's like, you don't have to know the right question to ask. And this doesn't have to be your path, but maybe you're listening to this because you need to hear that it's okay to just open your heart up and say, help. In fact, I've been talking a lot recently about this for some reason, but if you're familiar with Anne Lamott, she says she has 2 favorite prayers. One is help and one is thanks. And I really have adopted that. So if you need help, go ahead, open your heart and ask help.
I have, I have a practice that I practice throughout the day is prayers of gratitude. And I think, when you get those messages, it just means that you're working with your higher self. And when your heart opens, when you're cleared, pretty clear, you will work with your higher self. And it'll just come through dreams. It'll come through intuitive insights. It'll just come through people walking up to you and giving you the information you need. Like, Chief, you're going to die.
Right? That was timely, wasn't it? That was very timely information.
Yeah, I was ignoring all the symptoms and sure. So, but I did want to ask you a question. Did you learn the basic techniques? A little workshop in the basic techniques is a real great foundation for doing this. What did you, I mean, I don't know if you've heard of the animal communicator, Kate Bass. She's retired now. She's from the 90s, late 90s, early 20s. And she is now an Episcopal priest and doing quite well. But
how amazing.
She was the one who taught me, and it was a very basic workshop. I just learned, like, here's how you receive information, here's what you do with it, and good luck, let's practice.
Yeah. And it's really the best way to learn. It's a great question because, again, it kind of comes back to knowing your learning style. My business coach, Christine Kane, has walked me through some steps to really understand like how I learn and how I start new things. I am what they call a Colby quick start, which means I pretty much skip the instruction manual for everything I've ever tried to do. I just think, oh, how hard could it be? And I go, and sometimes that works out well. More often than not, it doesn't work out so well, but produces great memories and awesome stories. I'm also an Enneagram 4, which means I'm a feeling kind of person and tend to get stuck in dark places. And so the more I can,
I am too, by the way.
Yeah, Enneagram, go fours. And so is Christine, which has been a great fit for me because she's helped me decode. In fact, her book, The Soul Sourced Entrepreneur, is absolutely remarkable. And her work is absolutely remarkable. And funny story, back in the singer-songwriter days, I was a singer-songwriter, she was a singer-songwriter, and I was her intern. So we go back a long way, but the pieces didn't start to come together until the past couple of years. And so, it's an interesting question, Diane. I would say, I signed up for a school, and it was a very structured program. I really didn't know much about what to look for. I had a friend from one of my Sonia Choquette small groups who also wanted to learn. And so we just decided we were going to search for teachers together, and we were just going to pop ideas back and forth. And she ended up choosing one teacher and I ended up choosing another teacher. It didn't take me too long before I departed that school because my information was coming in differently. So, probably the best way to answer that question is to redirect anyone that's curious over to animallovelanguages.com. I have a 5-day free animal communication camp. It walks you through 5 of the many ways. These are 5 of the main ways that you're going to learn probably in any formal animal communication 101 kind of method or class. How does sensory information come in? How do we use that other 90% of our communication toolkit? And it's 5 days. You learn. It's actually there's 6 days actually because there's a bonus because I couldn't resist. But it just starts waking you up to what's already there. And that's really how I would describe how I learned. In fact, my mom the other day, she said, well, yeah, maybe you haven't had a much formal training. I've taken a lot of little workshops here and there, but everything that adds up to me from the moment I, hit this planet to now has informed how I do what I do. Years of meditation, years of yoga, years of soul seeking. And it turns out that it's I don't want to use the word easy. It's a part of who we are. It almost feels like, okay, this is going to be really cheesy. But if you have never seen the movie Independence Day, where it's one of those many movies where the aliens come down and want to, take over the planet. Well, in this particular movie, the government had captured a spaceship from an early, reconnaissance mission, and the darn thing wouldn't work. But when the aliens returned to take over the planet, the thing turned on and all these little bells and whistles started going, and the scientists got really excited. Well, that's how it felt like when I started talking to animals. It's like I discovered this whole other part of myself that made me feel more alive that it was like I just didn't know it was there. And so that's what I would offer you. It's like, if you want to feel more alive, if you want to make some really great new neural connections, and if you want to discover parts of what it means to be human that you really probably never knew were there, and nobody will ever actually tell you about it. And the one thing I knew when I started was you can't head book knowledge your way into this. You could read. I love books. I'm a writer. I'm a reader. And writers and readers tend to go hand in hand. I would read, every book I could get my hands on if only I had enough time. But you've got to do this. You've been having conversations all your life. You know how to have a conversation. You just don't know how to use all of your communication tools in your toolkit to have that conversation. And so that's kind of where I'll leave you as far as taking next steps. I have a business and marketing background, so shameless marketing plug here, but I spent quite a bit of time hiring animal communicators. And if you're really not sure what we're talking about, but you're super curious, hire one of us, book a session, work with us, and have a tangible, a hands-on, a visceral experience, because the animals don't lie. It's like somebody can maybe not believe in it at all, but it's like, that's a mental construct. You have to experience it. Then you can decide, does this feel real to me or not? I bet if I had a lot of extra money and I was a betting woman, I would bet you that you will discover a whole new world, and that you will feel mentally very confounded and psychically very curious and will want to learn more. So Diane, can you tell people how to reach you, how to work with you? Can you share information for where to find your book? And as we close out, to make sure people know how to get in touch with you.
Is The Magical Language of the Heart.
And it's a beautiful cover.
Rediscovering animal communication, because like we said, you're born with it. And that's available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback. And it's doing really well. And you can book an appointment through my website, www.diane, DianeSamsel.com. I'm very good at getting back to you if you write to me through that website, and just I'll guide you through the process, and it'll be, believe me, it'll be one of the best things you ever did if you've never done it before.
Definitely put it on your bucket list, and then don't just let it sit there. Do something about it. Please. Exactly. For the sake of the animals and for all of us, join us. We're fun to hang out with, and we sure are.
It's always a fun experience. A lot of people are nervous at first, and it's my job to help them feel comfortable with the whole process, because I am totally comfortable with it. My heart is wide open. The animal's heart is usually wide open. Everyone's in a good place, and by the end of the session, we're all on the same page. And so it's a thrilling experience usually.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good experience to have, even if you only have it once. But I'll bet you can't stop just one, and you want to start facilitating it yourself. So of course, that's what we're all about here. If you've enjoyed, those of you who are watching and listening or hanging on with us here, we appreciate you choosing Let's Talk to Animals instead of some of the many other podcasts that are out there. We value your time and your attention, and I'm very grateful for your good company. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, please like and subscribe. Please give us 5 stars, 50 stars, however many stars they'll let you. If you have a request for a podcast guest I haven't interviewed yet, please let me know and I'll do my best. If you have questions for myself or Diane, we'd love to hear from you. And please share this podcast, share the blogcast with those in your life who might be interested as well. It helps us out, and most importantly, it helps the animals. Animals are lined up waiting to talk to all of us in any way that they can. And so there are so many ways to plug in and be a part. And we just look forward to continuing to bring you new insights into how you can join in and have these experiences for yourself. So
Thank you very much for having me. I'm
so grateful for having you, Diane, and grateful for your very unique and very meaningful and impactful work. Okay, Pearl, it's finally time for this bird to go to bed, isn't it? knows how quiet he is. So anyway, we'll say goodbye for now. Please visit animallovelanguages.com. Under Learn With Me, you'll find podcasts, and you can re-listen and watch all of the great interviews we've already had and see who's on the docket for our next interview next week. So sending you love from our hearts, and wishing you a very good evening. And we'll be back next. Whoops. Wow. What was that? It was a mighty flight. Did you hear that? Mighty wings to end the evening. So all our love.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.